And for right now, because we are upgrading our website, you can't sign up through the website. You have to sign up through me. So I apologize for that in advance, but we are upgrading it so it's easier for me to get the links out quicker, and so we can do other things through the website. So we're very excited about it, but it's taking some time, which is why we've changed some things. And I think that's all I have. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and we will, and if everyone could mute themselves, that would be great. And Donovan, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay. Do I go to share screen?
What is the lecture on the 25th? What is the lecture?
What's that? I'm sorry?
What is the lecture on the 25th?
The 25th is, I'm sorry, it's not the 25th, it's the 24th. Sidney Williams is coming to talk about his family's, his mom and dad's letters to each other during the war, and what it was like at the home front versus what it was like in the war. So there were love letters that they wrote each other, and so it's good for Valentine's Day. Okay, all right, with this, Donovan, I'm gonna.
Are you seeing, yes, are you seeing my screen?
I'm seeing your screen. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay.
Just wanted, do you want to do, did you do, because I see the bottom of your screen too, so.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm seeing the bottom of your screen too. Do you want to just show the slide? Did you do the check slide?
Hang on.
Okay.
Whoops.
Okay.
Hang on. I'm
If we go, yeah.
Say it again. What am I doing wrong?
I'm seeing the bottom of your screen too. You might just want to put that down. So
yeah, I don't know how. Huh.
Right at the top, the second icon on the right-hand side.
You're muted.
No, no.
this one.
The
Yep.
what? Whoops.
I think it's the next one over.
Okay.
Bit more, this one.
Nope, I think it looks good now.
That's good.
Okay.
Is everyone seeing it? Is everyone? Yeah. Okay.
Well, welcome. Thank you. I want to start. This is a lecture in the Friends of Ski Mountain Mining History lecture series. We had one already this year. This is the second, and we will. We've got another one. We've got Professor Mike Nelson giving a talk on the April the 7th. It'll be the next in our series. Those of you who are not familiar with Friends of Ski Mountain, I think maybe most of you are, but for those of you who are not, we're a voluntary organization, a subcommittee of the museum, and our goal, our purpose in life is to stabilize the mining structures around Park City. We're a voluntary organization. All of the money we raise by donations, and we can see from that screen there, we've had, those are some of the projects. We've had 6 or 7 projects so far in our 6 or 7 years. We've got some quite big projects coming up. We've got some concerns about the Thanes shaft head frame and the Silver King head frame. They're showing signs of movement, and we don't want to lose them where the Daily West head frame toppled over. So we're going to have quite an ambitious fundraising activities in the future. Okay, I'm going to stop video, get myself off there. There we go. Yeah, the talk is the complex role of coal in the development of the West. So I'll jump straight in. The first photograph there is of the Wasatch coal mine in Colville, but dated 1908. I do want to, let me just go down here. I want to go to the laser pointer. There we go. I do want to say a couple of words of thanks to some people who've helped me, Navi Vernon and Joe Frazier with the Summit County Historical Society in Colville, and Kay Rossiter and Mary Wahlberg with the Uinta County museum in Evanston. They've both been very helpful and supplied photographs and information to me. I want to thank the gracious lady who lives directly north of the Almy cemetery. Kathy, my wife, and I visited the Almy cemetery. Almy is a town, and I'll explain this, just outside of Evanston, Wyoming. But quite a large mining community at one time. And when we visited the cemetery there, the lady came out and gave me quite a bit of information. Unfortunately, I never got her name, but I do want to thank her. What I'm going to talk about are just coal's complex role in the development of the West, how it was a vital resource. I'm going to talk a lot about immigrants. I didn't introduce myself to some of you. I forgot to do that. Donovan Symonds. I'm a retired mining engineer. When I mentioned immigrant came to mind because I'm an immigrant, as you probably tell. I immigrated to Canada and then to the US, and I've retired. I was in the mining consulting business for some time. I retired some years ago when I've been a docent at the museum and a committee member of the Friends of Ski Mountain Mining History. I'm going to talk about immigrants, the hardships that they faced. I want to talk about the number of accidents that were going on in the coal mines and the explosions and why these occurred. We'll talk about the railroad robber barons because they have had a big impact on the coal industry in the West, and some labor strife, the Chinese problem, which I'll talk about. And my emphasis is going to be on Coalville and Almy, Wyoming in particular, the neighboring to Park City. Talk about the importance of coal to the early settlers. This is a picture of the wagon train, a Mormon wagon train coming through Echo Canyon in 1867. But the pioneers searched for coal sooner after they arrived. The winters were particularly harsh, and they were desperately trying to find coal as soon as they arrived here. A lot of them came from Illinois, and they were used to coal there. And each winter brought suffering and death, and they called it the Coal Famine. They were desperately trying to find coal in the early days. They were cutting down trees, the small trees, the willows at first, and then the larger trees, and they were denuding the trees around Salt Lake and were desperately trying to find coal deposits. They did find a small deposit after about 2 years down in San Pete County, south of Salt Lake. And I think it was two Welshmen found it, and they named the town Wales. So when you look at the map, you'll see Wales, the town of Wales down there. It wasn't not a particularly good deposit, and they had problems transporting the coal by a oxen cart into Salt Lake. But the Indians would stop them on the way and demand a ransom as they went, so that didn't go too well. And the quote there is, "The dread of the coal famine continued with each approach of winter." Just want to show a quick location map. What I'm going to talk about, I think my pointer should work. We can see Park City in the bottom left-hand corner here. Coalville, the Summit County capital. Echo Junction just outside Coalville, where the Transcontinental Railway turns and then goes to Ogden. And then from Coalville, about an hour's drive in a car these days is Evanston to the east. And then just north of there is the town of Almy. And I'll talk quite a bit about those, Coalville and Almy, shortly. You can see further back along the Transcontinental Railway, is Rock Springs, which was a mining town, coal mining town. I'll talk about that. And also there was a spur line up to Canary, Wyoming. I won't talk too much about that one. We'll talk about the early uses of coal, particularly in the 19th and first half of the 20th century. Obviously, home heating. Desperately needed, I mentioned that. Also, when we think about the immigrants coming to Utah, they got on a train a steam-driven train in England. A lot of them came from England. Went on to probably got a steamship out of Liverpool, with obviously fired by coal. Then on to another train when they arrived in New York. Finally landed in New York and made their way across the West. When some of them got to the mining towns, all of the equipment was steam driven at that time. The hoists where they wind up the cages up and down into the mines were all steam winders. The compressors were steam driven, so everything was very dependent on steel. On coal. You can see some of the other items there. I will point out the steam engine in the bottom left-hand corner there. That is the rocket that was developed by George Stephenson, who was the father of the railway. And I'll also talk about him. He developed. He was a miner, and he developed one of the first miner safety lamps, and we'll talk about that later. When I was going to give this talk, I was asked, well, what's the difference between coal and silver mining? We're familiar with silver mining in Park City, however, not so familiar with coal. And so I just wanted to put out some of the differences. From a geological standpoint, coal has been laid down over millions of years in a strata. It's old forests. And so the rocks are stratified. So you can see the diagram on the left. You've got the coal seam, and it's been mined out in this area. And then above it, you've got the various strata, the coal, the shale, sandstone laying in strata above the coal seam. When you look at silver mining, typically the rocks the silver veins are intrusive into typically quartzites or much harder rocks. In fact, when miners talk about the different types of mining, they talk about hard rock, there's a silver type mining or metal mining, and then there's the coal, which is sometimes a softer rock. The strength of the rocks is important. That the coal is a much softer rock. And it can be, I show a modern coal cutting machine on the left there, that's a shearer, and you'll see it's got quite large teeth. These days they don't blast the coal, they mine it with very powerful sort of grinding machines. The early miners used hand augers, like a big hand drill, to drill the face. Now you've seen the miners in Park City, they use the hammer, the Cornish way, the single jack and double jack, hitting the rocks hard with a hammer, and then using dynamite to blast the rocks, much harder rocks than coal. Another couple of big differences is the hazard levels. The early coal mines, in fact, probably still to this day, are typically twice as dangerous as hard rock or metal mines. And one of the big things the problems they have are the roof falls and explosions are the two main causes, particularly roof falls. And I'll address this later, but again, because of the strata, the roof is less strong, competent than it is in hard rock or silver mining. And so roof falls are quite a serious problem in coal mining. And with silver, the danger levels are still there, but they're less than coal. A key economic factor in coal is rail access, and I'll show the next slide or so. It's a very relative cheap commodity. It's a bulk commodity, and so just the fact that you found coal, it doesn't mean you can mine it and get it out of there unless you have some method of transporting it out of there. And particularly rail was very important. And this, as we will get into it, this was particularly important in the West. In terms of silver mining or gold mining, the ore grade is the dominant factor. I just want to talk about the value in terms of a pound of the commodity. You can see coal is about 2 cents a pound. So it's a relatively cheap commodity. Certainly when we look at silver, which we're familiar with in Park City, nearly $400 a pound. So it's a big difference in the value of the commodity. And this gets back to how you need this method of transportation to get it out of there. And I did look up the coal to silver price ratio dating back to 1880. And the ratio still, this sort of ratio still was in place then. Although coal was actually relatively higher price at that time than it is today. Quick slide on coal and the formation. It starts off as forests, and then eventually is buried by strata over the year by sediments, and eventually it increases in value when it's under pressure and heat, and after hundreds of millions, a couple of 100 million years, forms coal. The kind of important numbers I'll show you that is regarding the heat content. In other words, if you have a pound of wood, roughly, it's got 4,000 BTUs in it, which is a BTU is the amount of energy, an energy unit. If you have a bituminous coal, it's got 3 times that amount of heat. So in other words, a pound of coal, bituminous coal, has much more heat content in the coal, and that's important when you've got to transporting this, or if you're burning it in a home fire. I remember growing up with coal fires in England. The coal was much hotter, but gives you a much hotter fire than a wood fire does. Just going to talk briefly about the dangers in coal mines. This is some figures from fatalities in the US from 1870 to 1914 by type. I think if I'd asked probably each one of you, what do you think the most dangerous thing about a coal mine is, or the old coal mines, you'd probably, I imagine that most of you would say, well, it's the explosions. It was actually you can see from this that most of the fatalities that occurred in this period were from roof falls and pillar falls. The pillars are the areas this is a picture from a 1921 coal mine in around Price area, Wattis. You can see this is the pillars are at the side, and the roof. This is the roof falls are at the top here. Just looking at this slide, it really gives me quite a lot. It gives me a lot of concern. Just the unsupported roof here, and they've got, unfortunately, I can't with the names of people on the right. You can't see. There's another miner on the right there, but they're this coal has just been blasted, and they're about to break it down a bit and load it. But just the look of that roof gives me great concern. Another quick chart on historical mining fatalities. See that we don't have data earlier than 1930 for metal and non-metal mines, but you can see the difference. If we look at 1910 was the worst year for coal fatalities. 2,800 people were killed that year. But if you compare 1931, you can see the greater number of people, first of all, working in the mines, nearly 600,000 miners in coal miners and 159,000 metal miners. And the fatalities per 1,000 employees are about twice in coal mines that they are in metal mines. In 2018, some data I had, the latest data I had at the time, you can see the number of miners obviously is down considerably. Fatalities are down to 12. The ratio is very low. Still about twice what it is for metal mines, but it's really come down. And I've been in the industry. It's something the miners and I am, and the mining industry is proud of. They've got the safety record down to a good level. Obviously any fatalities are too many, but they're so much better than they were. It's because of the mining companies do put a great deal of emphasis on safety. I did look up for 2018 what the 25 most dangerous professions were, and mining was actually number 25 by that time. The most dangerous was logging workers, which you can see there is about 10 times as dangerous on that as coal. I did look up just before this presentation to see what the fatalities were for coal mining in the US for 2020, the latest numbers, and there were 5 fatalities. So obviously, again, 5 too many, but a really significant improvement, and the industry, some in the industry works very hard at. Just to go back about the sort of attitude of the owners and the inspectors. These are to the miners, and these are notes, and I'll read them out from the Mine Inspector Industrial Commission reports in 1906. I'm just losing part of that on the top there, so I'll have to look at my notes here. The first one was Mr. M. Imanaka. Obviously, he's a Japanese, aged 29. This man came to his death by rock falling from the roof in the mine car. Cause of accident, his own neglect. Frank Mivy came to his death by a fall of coal at winter quarters, entirely due to carelessness on his part. We exonerate Utah Fuel for any blame whatsoever. Emil Rizzi, Italian, aged 22, Moreland Mine. Deceased came to his death through his own carelessness and negligence by being crushed by top coal, which he knew to be dangerous and unsafe. George Geropoulos, a Greek, single, aged 24 years, walking with dinner pail in one hand, a shovel in the other. Had he taken ordinary precautions, he could have seen the trip of man cars was coming. The approach, when you go back and you read the approach to the owners of the mines and the mine inspectors, the onus was put completely on the workers. The mine owners had little in the courts at the time upheld this. The owners were very little responsible for accident rates, which was pretty awful. And at the bottom there, there's the first mine inspector in Utah was not appointed till 1892. And Utah and Colorado mine fatality records were twice as high as the national average. So they were twice as high as the mines in West Virginia or Pennsylvania. So why were there so many accidents in Western coal mines? An inexperienced labor force with little training. A lot of the miners, some of the miners who came, particularly from the UK early on, were well trained, but there was a lot of immigrant labor in general that came both from the UK and from Europe who were not particularly well trained. And certainly when they arrived here, there was no sort of training program. They just give them a shovel and get in the mine right away. And you could see by the roof conditions of the roof, they were quite dangerous. Another aspect was the miners were paid in those times pretty much totally on the tons that they produced or the footage driven. And that leads to jobs such as cleanup and roof support. They don't generate the revenue of loading and the coal, so they tended to get rushed or left behind. Language difficulties were also an issue. When the mines were there were English-speaking people, obviously, but also Greeks and Italians and Swedes and Finns and all the various languages all coming together in the mine created some obviously communication problems. The weakness of the strata, particularly the mines in the west tended to be more folded and faulted than the ones back east. So that again added to the danger. And then we've got the high gas content of many coals and extensive use of black powder in the mines. The Park City hard rock mines tended to use a dynamite. The black powder was used quite extensively in the early mines in the West. I want to talk to you about explosions, because that's something that is obviously, to talk about early coal mining, you've got to talk about explosions in the mines. And just give a brief understanding of all coal seams give off methane, which methane is the gas that natural gas, the gas that we use to cook in a gas stove at home. In mine, it's called fire damp. And all coals give off an amount. Some gassy coals give off a lot. Some other coals, the ones for example, in Colville, not so much. And methane has an explosive range of 5 to 15%. When it's within that range, it will explode. The modern regulations, these are the modern regulations today. They will stop at the operation of equipment at about 1%, and then take the miners out of the mine at 2%. So they want to keep that level obviously below the 5%. And to do that, you reduce when the gas is given off, you want to have good ventilation, which dilutes the gas. And you also want to reduce the sources of ignition, open flames in particular. One thing that the miners noticed early on was that a lot of the explosions were occurring as cold fronts when the weather was changing. And what they found out is that if the cold front comes through, the pressure drops. That allows more gas to escape, which leads to a higher chance of explosion. And in coal, we think of the methane explosion as the dangerous thing, and it is. It's the initial explosion, but the really serious explosions occur because the coal dust is raised. So you have a methane ignition. It creates a shock wave in the mine, and if there's a lot of coal dust present, that raises up and then it explodes. Quick talk about the Canary in the coal mine. You've all heard of that one. That is a cage on the top left-hand corner. This is an American version. You can see the Canary. He's got a seed in here, and then he's got a jug here that had water. And they carried the Canary around, and they would raise the Canary cage up to the roof, because that's where the methane and also the carbon monoxide they're lighter than air, and so they would exist at the top in the roof. And the Canary would get agitated. The Canary has a very rapid heartbeat, and it has this rapid exchange of air into its bloodstream. And so the Canary, if the oxygen levels would go down, the Canary would get very agitated, and it would fall off its perch. And that would be, or get agitated first, which was the initial indication. Then if it got bad, it would fall off its perch. And that's telling the miner that, that we're in it's a bad conditions. It's giving him the warning before it gets to suffocate him. The device on the right is a friend, my colleague, was my business partner for 40 years, was an old coal miner. He died, unfortunately, about a year ago. But this is a device that he had got. And what this is, the Canary would sit inside this device. You can see it's got a door. The door would be open. There's a grill at the end, so the Canary can't fly out. But if the Canary started to get agitated, and if it reached the point where it fell off, you could close up the cage, and then this bottle on the top is an oxygen bottle, and he could give a quick boost of oxygen, and that would revive the Canary. So it was a Canary resuscitator. These are some mine lamps. These are lamps that I actually have. And the early ones, this on the left is a Stevenson lamp. The mine lamps were invented in England all about the same time, within a couple of months of each other, actually. So Humphrey Davy, and George Stephenson in particular invented the lamp. And what they discovered that is if they surrounded, if they had a light in the bottom, and then they surrounded it with a gauze, you could have this light, the lamp burning inside, but it wouldn't allow the air, the ignition to go through the gauze, because the gauze would dissipate the heat. And this is quite a, obviously made a tremendous difference to safety underground. The miners could operate with these lamps. What they found, this one is on the left, is one of my prize collections. It's from about 1840. And then the next one, you can see there's a UK German lamp about 1900 and 1930, and then a modern lamp on the right. Although we say they're lamps, they were actually one of the main uses and the main functions of them was actually they were more gas detectors, because they could tell by the way the flame was burning, if it was burning bluer color, and if it was burning higher, that indicated more gas or they were in a dangerous environment. So the miners tended to use the safety lamps as more of a gas detector. And then if they found that there wasn't gas, then they would get out a candle or an open flame lamp. Oops, I'm not sure this is. I'm gonna. Oops, yes, we're okay. This is. I'm just gonna. If I can stop this before it goes, I don't know. Maybe not. This is an explosion. Whoop, there we go. This is a coal dust explosion from a controlled explosion from the Bureau of Mines test facility in Brewston, Pennsylvania. There were two places in the world that I'm familiar with who did a lot of research on coal safety, mine safety. That was the facility in Brewston, the US Bureau of Mines in Brewston, and the Bretby facility in the UK. This is just a quick example, and I might move through. I'm a little over time, but this is kind of what a modern miner would wear versus the old line. So versus the miners you can see on the right have little or no safety equipment. They've also shown they've got open flame lights there. But he's raising the safety lamp up on the left there to measure the gas content of the air of the mine close to the roof. He's got a cap lamp, electric cap lamp driven from a battery. This he's also got a self-contained self-rescuer, which helps him breathe. If the air is totally bad, he can breathe through that device. It turns the breath that he breathes, the carbon dioxide that he's breathing, into oxygen. That has a life of about an hour. That is about an hour for him to get to a safer place. He's also got this stick is important because what he uses that for, one, it would use it to measure. They used it to measure the distance that the miners were mining, but also to hit the roof. He would hit the roof with that stick, and if he got a hollow sound, he knew that the roof needed to be torn, paled down. Talk a little bit about why did the immigrants leave and come here? There were fewer opportunities back home. The rigid social structure created few opportunities to advance. Obviously the money, and I speak to some extent from as an immigrant, my experiences. The money was much greater here. There was a chance to buy. They had a chance to buy home. Most of the miners I know in England in the 1860s and 70s the coal miners lived in houses that were owned by the mine. So if they went out on strike, or if something went wrong, they lost their job, they lost their house as well. Whereas if they came over here, there was a much better chance of buying their own home. Talking to some of the coal miners, or some of the farmers in the Heber Valley, a lot of them in the 20s and 30s worked at the mine, what's the mine? Mayflower mine, through the Keatley portal over by Deer Valley there. And they could earn enough money in the winter working in the mine to enable them to buy land. And a lot of the farmers in the Heber Valley who were able to buy the land were able to get it because of the working at the mine in Park City. More opportunities for the kids and lots of jobs and access to hunting and fishing, which for miners has always been a big thing. This is a family, the photo is a family of Finnish miners in Carbon County, and you can see how obviously they started, when they came, the relatives came as well, so quite a bit of immigration. I want to focus now on, I guess I need to speed up, my wife is telling me. So anyway, we'll want to talk about Coalville focus. This is a Grass Creek mine around about 1922. Brief history of Utah coal. I mentioned the Sanpete County, approximately 1850. And in 1854, the territorial government issued a reward of $1,000. That's what $1,000 then is an awful lot of money, probably close to $1 million today, for the discovery of coal, a coal seam. They wanted a coal seam greater, I think, than 2 feet within 40 miles of Salt Lake City. The early LDS settlers arrived in the Chalk Creek area, which is just north and east of what is now Coalville, in 1858, led by William Smith. The new immigrants would come out to the Missouri and then come across by wagon train to Coalville, what is now Coalville. And a lot of the early converts to arrive in Coalville were Yorkshire miners, and they actually used to talk about what I read in the literature there. They had difficulty understanding their Yorkshire accents when they got here. But the population of Coalville in 1870 was 600, and I think the population of Park City at that time was about 160, so it was quite a bit bigger than Park City. And 64% of the adults were from the UK. This is a map. This is Coalville down here. And out of Coalville, there were two areas, mining areas, the Grass Creek area and then the Chalk Creek area further south. The Grass Creek area was a larger mining area, but important thing to look at is the name of the mine, Union Pacific, 1, 2, 3, Union Pacific. A lot of the mines are owned by the Union Pacific, the railroad company. The first mine that was opened was just the one at the top here, the old church mine. One of the problems with the coal in Coal Creek was that the area was fairly heavily folded and faulted. The section below here is a section through the coal seams, and you can see the seams were dipping quite significantly. And this is a chapel mine portal. You can see how it dips down quite significantly into the mountain. That makes mining a lot more difficult. Although the coal seams were quite thick, they were 10 feet thick. The fact that they were dipping, and the fact that it was also quite heavily faulted, made the mining in the Coalville area, the Chalk Creek, difficult. Also, the coal was a subbituminous. If you remember that diagram I showed you earlier on of the different types of coals, bituminous is a higher quality, higher rank coal, more heating value. Subbituminous is slightly lower heating value. So it was not as good a quality coal, for example, as the coal from Price area, or I think from the Almy coals. One of the things that's, I just wanted to, this is from one of the Grass Creek mine, which was the largest mine, I think, in Colville, or in the Colville area, excuse me. One thing I just pointed out there is that the coal came from the mine and went directly into the rail cars. The significance of that, there's no stockpile. So the mine was very dependent upon the railway, Union Pacific, delivering coal cars and also taking the coal cars away. So if they control the other mines around, and they could really pressure and really adversely affect the mines in Colville, this Colville area, the Grass Creek area. And often they did that. They just didn't supply coal cars, or they didn't take them away, and so the mines would have to shut down. I'll go through these fairly quickly. The first mine in 1859. By 1867, there were 7 mines. Before 1873, the coal from Grass Creek and the Colville area was shipped by ox cart to Salt Lake City and to Park City, when the mines in Park City was in 1871 were opening. But the literature I read said they used to have a great difficulty getting over Parley Summit with the coal, with the ox carts. Union Pacific, when the railway came through, he started to open mines in Wyoming, and I'll talk about the Almy mines. A narrow gauge railway was put in up to through Chalk Creek. They enabled the coal to be taken out to Echo. Some of these I guess I'll move through these a bit quicker. But in 1880 they built an independent companies, of which R.C. Chambers was the name that we recognized from Park City, the Ontario mine. He was a president of the company that put in a narrow gauge railway from Colville, what is Colville, up to Park City. However, the UP in their predatory monopoly decided at the same time they would put a standard gauge railway right next to it, so that the rail trail that now goes down from Park City to Colville, at one time there was a narrow gauge and a standard gauge, and it didn't last very long. The UP eventually bought out the owners of the narrow gauge, and then closed it down. The Edmonds Tucker Act of 1877 was an act where the federal government was in a tussle with the LDS Church, and they passed a law that the church had to, the LDS Church had to sell any assets greater than $50,000, which meant that they had to sell the mines. So the mines that were owned by the church, Mormon Church at that time, were sold. However, after that, the Union Pacific went into receivership. They were having difficulty expansion, and so they had to sell their mines to the great delight of the local residents. And in 1896, the differences between the federal government and the LDS Church were resolved, particularly with regard to polygamy, and Utah became a state, and the mines reopened again. And the high point of mining in Colville was the Colville area between 1900 and World War I, when the mines were producing about, some of them about 4,000 tons a month, and the coal was going mainly to Park City. Actually, a lot of it went to Park City, and some home heating around the areas. By the way, I forgot that the engine that you see on the left there is engine 1616, which was the local train that went, local engine that went between Echo Junction and Park City every day. And that photo's from about 1920. In 1886, the Denver Rio Grande constructed the railway from Salt Lake to Carbon County, a Price area. This area had much better coal. better reserves. The miners, most of the miners were overjoyed to have the competition to the UP. The UP was really not well thought of at all by the miners particularly. So many miners actually, as the coal industry slowed down in Colville and Almy and some of those areas, a lot of the miners moved to the Price area. This actually is a picture of the steakhouse in Colville right after the 1900 Schofield disaster. There were 200 lives lost in the Schofield mine. That's the largest mine disaster in Utah's history. But 11 of the men who died were from Colville, who had left when the mine started to slow down. A lot of the miners left and went to the Price area, but unfortunately, sadly, were killed when they were there. The decline of Colville started to slow down after the 1921, and eventually the last mine closed in Grass Creek in 1938 as the reserves were running out. And the photo on the left is a picture of town of Grass Creek in about 1940, which you can see is pretty almost a ghost town there. Back to I'll show you this location map so you can see the town of Almy, which is just, I say Evanston is about an hour's drive east of Park City, and the town of Almy was just north of that. This is a Google Earth picture at the bottom. You can see the town of Evanston is here. This is the Transcontinental Railway, and then from the Transcontinental, you can see from the satellite image where the rail spur came off, and then traveled along the valley floor here. The coal mines here in Almy all outcropped along. These are the hills rising to the east, and the mines all outcropped along this outcrop, starting from mine number 1, and there was about 12 mines, I think, going up on the outcrop here. It's now the rail line is what Highway 89 is actually the old base of the rail bed. Just a quick timeline of Almy. The coal was discovered in 1868, probably at the time the surveyors were surveying the Transcontinental Railway. They built the spur line in 1870. So the mines developed very quickly. The coal was right there by the rail, and almost all of the coal was used for the rail lines. At least 10 mines opened quickly in 1870. However, they started to have some explosions. The rank of the coal was higher quality, but it also was gassier, and so they started to have some serious explosions. However, between 1880 and 1900, the population of Almy grew to 4,000, which is quite about the same, roughly the same sort of growth side that went on in Park City. Expanded very quickly. In 1881, there was an explosion. I can't see the number there. I think it's Rocky Mountain number 4, I think. Sadly killing 35 Chinese and 2 white men. When you go to the Almy Cemetery, there's a board there with the names of the miners who were killed in the various explosions. And for that explosion in 1881, it just lists 35 Chinese. There's no names to any of the Chinese. It just 35 Chinese, and then the names of the Anglos that were killed. So I won't go through each of these, but the Almy number 4 blew up in 1886, killing 11. Almy number 5 blew up in 1888, killing 6. And then again in 1880, the worst one in 1895, Almy number 5 blew up again, killing 61 men and boys. And these are obviously dangerous mines. That mine was finally closed in 1909, but the mines continued to operate until 1949, when in 1950 the diesel locomotives replaced steam. This is just a picture of the central picture of the complete devastation of mine number 5 explosion. Of the 60 odd people that were killed, I think 20 were killed in the surface, in the surface building there. A few pictures of the town of Almy. It's surprising when you drive, if you drive to Almy, north of Evanston, there's very little there. At the time, you can see that with a population of 4,000, had 5 post offices and lots of saloons, etc. But when you go there now, it's not a ghost town. You just don't see very little. There's a few there's no ranches and buildings, but there's very little to show that there was a town of this size there anymore. I want to kind of conclude talking about this Rock Springs massacre. So this affected mining in the West and also particularly Park City. This occurred on September the 2nd of 1885. There was a great deal of resentment against, as I mentioned, against the Union Pacific. They owned the coal mines, and what they were doing was they were hiring Chinese workers who'd had come over here to work on the railway and ended up working in the mines. But the Union Pacific was hiring the Chinese workers they were worked for lower pay, and they also hired them, excuse me, as strike breakers. On September the 2nd, 1885, the 28 Chinese were murdered, 15 were wounded, and 75 homes were destroyed. And it was mainly by the Knights of Labor who were responsible for this, mainly Cornish, Irish, Welsh, and Swedes. The Chinese, many of them fled to Evanston, west to Evanston, and then on, I'm sure, on to Park City. But many of the mine owners and the labor organizations prohibited the Chinese from working in the mines after this. And when we look at the mines in Park City, the Chinatown, the Chinese community lived in the Poison Creek area, but the very few, if any, worked in the mines in Park City. Just in summary, last 2 slides, coal brought change to the West, the immigration. Along with the miners were skilled tradesmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, stonemasons. It facilitated the expansion of the railroad throughout the West and enabled industrial development and expansion. The ability of the miners and the other immigrants to own land was a vital part of home heating, especially during the hot winters, and it created a great deal of cultural and religious diversification. It brought the coal brought a lot of immigrants who brought a lot of positive things to the West. I'll end on this note. This is just more of something for you to think about as I end and talking about the coal. And do we have the responsibility to the towns and individuals that have produced our low-cost energy through coal? And how do we help the towns, Price area, for example, to transition away from coal to new technologies, industries, and ultimate jobs? Anyway, I'll leave you to think about. Think about that one. I may have got just about finished on time, but I think I have certainly time for some questions. Do I go now, Diane? Do I go to stop sharing the screen? I guess I hit that, do I?
Or you can, yeah, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
If you have a question for Donovan, feel free to either unmute yourself or feel free to put something in the chat and let us know any questions you may have. And Donovan, thank you. This was a great lecture. I got a lot out of this.
Thank you.
This is Jan Jaworski. I have a question. You never mentioned the role of women in the mines, like if they were allowed in that area, because we know that they weren't allowed in the Park City mines.
Yeah, at that time, my understanding that the women were not working in the mines. They did Some of the women worked on, and more of the younger boys worked on the surface. A few women, but not very many. I've rarely seen, when the photographs that I see, I rarely see any women. I should just point out that that's not the case today. There's quite a few women working who do work not only in the surface mines but also underground as well. Yeah, but in those days, I don't think, from the photos, I don't think any of the women worked in the mine underground. No.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there's one there. Can I comment? What is it on the mine? I don't quite see the rest of that one.
Can you comment on the mines under Park City Mountain?
The mines under Park City. Well, those are the hard rock mines. Yeah, we've got that's a subject for another. We'll have to have another. We've got another talk on hard rock mining in the old days in Park City. We had one. We should perhaps get that one again. But the mines in Park City were all hard rock mines: silver, lead, zinc, some gold, but mainly silver was the main commodity there. And they were hard rock, not prone to explosions like the coal mines. There's no, and is that there isn't any coal under Park City? No, it's different formation, and no, the nearest coal to Park City is at Colville. Yeah.
Any other questions for Donovan?
All right.
I'd just like to say thank you to Donovan. His lectures are always so interesting, and we are all so fortunate to have the benefit of his mining expertise and his deep knowledge of the history of mining in our area. Thank you, Donovan. It was wonderful.
Sally, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. We
It was
agree.
wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed doing it, and I've certainly learned a lot about the mining. It's interesting, though, the effect that the Union Pacific had on the fact that they owned the mines and they owned the railway, and they could dictate whether the mines operated or not. It was you can see how unpopular, the reason why they were so unpopular, and that Rock Springs massacre, although the Chinese regrettably were murdered, there was much resentment. Really, was probably as much against the Union Pacific as it was the Chinese workers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
There were two other questions that came up. Who owns the mines today? Who owns the coal mines today? And what effect did Park City have on the coal mines?
I assume they mean that when you say that, I assume you mean the coal that the mines in Colville and Almy, they've all shut down. The land's been reclaimed. There are no mines there. But as far as who owns the coal mines in the rest of the country, typically the mines are owned by. There's a lot. The railways are not involved. I'm not sure my knowledge of the monopoly laws in the US. I don't think the railways are allowed to own the mines. The railways did own, by the way, a lot of land throughout the West. Burlington Northern, I know, owned a lot of land in Wyoming. But mainly the mines these days are owned generally by large mining companies, Peabody, Arch. The larger mining companies own them. Although in the Appalachian area, there's more diverse ownership. In Utah, the coal mines are essentially around the Price area, Carbon and Emery counties, and they are owned by predominantly mining companies. Yeah. And what was the other question?
What effect did Park City have on the coal mines?
Well, Park City was a big market for the coal. All, you know, in the early days, all of the engines in Park City were steam driven. In fact, the tramway that comes down from the Silver King into town, it used to be the Silver King Coalition building before it burnt down. The tramway that came down actually brought concentrates from the Silver King down, and it took coal. Coal was loaded into those buckets and was taken up the mountain to service the steam winders and the various compressors and things, which are all steam driven. And of course, the Ontario was the first one that consumed a lot of coal. That's why R.C. Chambers was bought into the railway so they could supply coal. So a lot of the coal, particularly from the Colville area in the 1900 to 1920s, was supplied to the Park City mines up until they started to get electrified. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions? I want to thank Donovan for the lecture today and for all his expertise. And there were a lot of thank yous on the side in the chat box, Donovan, for you. And I want to thank all of you for coming. We appreciate it. And we hope to see you next time.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Donovan. We really enjoyed all the information, and I want to go to find that town of Almy.
What?
I want to find that town and that cemetery and Almy.
Almy, yeah, it was that.
I've read about it a lot, no park records.
Well, Kathy and I, we
I've
went,
never
you
been
know,
there.
I was going to do the talk and this talk, and so we decided to drive out there, and it's strange. I mean, there's really nothing. There's not hardly anything in Almy anymore, and we had a tough time finding the cemetery. We drove past it a couple of times, and then finally found it. But it's well looked after. But and the lady who came out of the building, as I said, that directly to the north of the cemetery was very helpful and provided us with information. But yeah, it's just strange, as you know, for such a town that had 4,000 residents as recently as 1900 has sort of disappeared. Even though there's one of the photographs has a very large meeting house, a LDS meeting house. It appears to be stone built, and we never saw that. Maybe we missed it, but there's really not much to it there anymore, apart from a few sort of ranch houses and things. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. It was great.
Okay, Barb. Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So thank you all again. And anything else before?
How many did we get? What was the participants in the end?
We had about 55.
Oh, all right. Okay, well, good.
And a couple people said they're going to watch it because we're recording it. So they did.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to end the meeting. So thank you, everyone. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.